With Chief Minister Andrew Barr. Andrew is the first openly gay head of any Australian state or territory. He made history here in Canberra, and he is an absolutely strong ally and supporter of the LGBTIQ plus community here in Canberra. He's done a number of amazing initiatives, and we're really appreciative of him joining us here today. So we're going to jump straight into our questions now. So, look, Chief Minister, are you able to tell us a little bit about what it's like to be Australia's first openly gay state and territory leader?
Oh, it has its challenges. There's perhaps some issues that people sort of view how you respond or the sorts of policies you pursue just through the lens of sexuality rather than perhaps other things like political party affiliation or or ideological viewpoint or the like. So I still experience on a perhaps all too frequent basis a level of homophobia in how people respond to certain political issues. So it tends to be the most common form of abuse when people disagree with a particular policy position is to hone in on my sexuality as an attack point. So I have to say that's still a feature of, particularly in social media. It's a little bit less so when people actually have to put a face or a voice to their engagement, but that's an all too common theme I find. But more broadly, nearly 5 years into this role now, I'd have to say that sort of the novelty value has, for the media and others, has sort of worn off, and to the extent that represents progress, that not everything is now reported through that lens in the mainstream media, I think is a good sign of progress.
Thank you. Therefore, in your perspective, how important is visibility, and such as yours to younger LGBTIQ plus people?
It's a difficult question to answer at times because it will obviously be in the eye of the younger people. I guess if I look at my own experience, I didn't have any equivalent role models going back 20, 25 years ago. So, look, I hope it does make a difference just to demonstrate to people that there's no area of public life or indeed of professional experience that you can't aspire to, sort of regardless of your sexuality. And I think that's one of the really pleasing things that not just me in this role, but many other politicians and leaders in many other fields now. I think give us hope that the world is changing in a better way.
I think that's really important, and it does follow on to our next question is, did you have someone to look up to when you were younger, like a role model or a leader?
Oh, I certainly did in the context of my own sort of personal development, but not someone who was gay or lesbian. So I guess like most young people, there were obviously significant adults in my life, from my parents through to cousins and friends, teachers and others who obviously have helped shape who I am now. But no, there weren't sort of equivalent high-profile people in politics or economics, political science. My time at the ANU probably saw the emergence of, for example, a sexuality department. I remember as treasurer of the Students' Association in 1994 funding a sexuality department for the first time. So we can see, the origins of how change occurs. And whilst obviously there was a generation before me who paved the way and provided opportunities, as I look back 25 years later at what's happened on university campuses, for example, I can see the beginning, the formation of creating a better and more supportive environment, really building pace in the 1990s.
That's fantastic.
As you've said, back in your time, there's probably less so of a role model to look up to. So how do you try to be a good role model to the next generation?
Again, a really good question. and there's no one easy or straightforward answer. I think mostly for me it's to be true to myself and what I've got into politics and into this sort of active public life to achieve. Clearly I guess I take have a further sense of a special responsibility around being the first to both demonstrate that it's, on one level, it's not an issue, sexuality, but on the other, it sort of leaves me with both a sense that this is an opportunity to make a difference, but then also to specifically pursue a range of issues on law reform, on visibility, on community engagement, participation, that make it easier for those who follow. So it's a dual path, I think. One of just being there and showing you can do it, and then another of smoothing the way, making it easier for the next generation. And as I look now just within my own working environment, that there are two other ministers in the ACT government who identify as LGBTI is really encouraging now. As a sense that they are both significantly younger than me and will be there to carry on the work that I've started. So I think that's encouraging for the future.
And I guess with each successive step, it becomes easier and easier for each successive generation. Or at least that's the hope.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, I guess a parallel experience is to look at Julia Gillard's role as the first female Prime Minister, and we've had a number of female state and territory leaders now who have been the first, prove it's possible, worldwide end, and then make it easier for the next generation.
Absolutely. Look, one of AFRA Australia's biggest offerings is its mentoring program, so it's really, really keen to help the next generation of LGBTIQ professionals and leaders and champions really develop themselves and to link with mentors to be their authentic self. Have you ever had a mentor within your professional life?
I've had a few people who've obviously provided some good advice and assisted me at various points through the political process, and whether it goes back to being involved in student politics and in Young Labor in the last century to my more recent political career. So I've had a number of people who've been supportive along the way. Sometimes that's been quite strategic political advice, other times it's been people who mentored my policy development and thinking around particular issues, through to people who provide the sort of moral and practical support that you sort of need on a day-to-day basis. So I've been pretty lucky along the way, have the strong support of my partner, my family and my close friends. You can't take on a role like mine without that sort of support. An old adage, I think it was Paul Keating might have said, if you want a friend in politics, get a dog. No, it can be a tough and compromising business. So I think it is important, and I take that responsibility for other people both in my political office, in the broader Labor Party, and in politics generally. I'm not necessarily always as generous with my time with people on the other side of politics as I am on my own side, but you do form those sorts of networks and connections. And marriage equality, for example, is something where we did work really closely across the political divide, people in multiple political parties, and there was a very supportive network. So that's a really good practical example of that sort of mentoring, and then you work together, get that issue resolved, and then business as usual resumes in terms of everyday politics.
Absolutely.
So have you ever been a mentor in your personal or professional life?
Yes, I think so, and sometimes in quite formal ways, and other times I think just as a sounding board, as a person who's now been around this system and politics for quite some time. I've lived in Canberra for more than 40 years now, so I guess there's a lot of corporate memory around how the ACT economy functions, how government and politics operates, and I've obviously learnt a lot over several decades now around Australian politics and Australian political economy, university sector. In fact, all of the different portfolios that I've held over the years gives you a pretty good broad insight into how Australian society operates. I guess the challenge in a role like mine now is I just cover such a breadth of issues that it's difficult to be a specialist in anything anymore, but I know about a lot of things these days.
Awesome. Following on from that, do you think mentoring is important to help develop the next generation of LGBTIQ plus leaders within the Canberra society and I guess more broadly nationally?
Look, I think it is, but it can take many forms.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't have to be overly formal and structured. At times it can just be someone who you could say, oh, I've got this issue, I'm grappling with it, I don't know how to resolve it. Or it could be, I find it really difficult to engage with new people in, in social settings. You've got any tips? There's a whole range of ways, or it can just be, at times, and in this social media age, I've had lots of feedback from people who sort of sent me messages in social media where I might have responded, and that's either been the beginning of a friendship or has just made a difference for either for me or that individual along the way. That a lot of the time in politics you get a lot of negative feedback. People always were prepared to tell you, when they think something's wrong. And so I'd be surprised how appreciated the odd supportive comment can be. And I know people in other professions and in other walks of life experience the same sorts of pressures and demands. So I've never found a problem. I've never heard of a circumstance where someone having something nice to say and being supportive and offering help has ever been problematic really for anyone.
And sometimes just some genuine advice or feedback at the right time can make just such an important difference to someone.
I mean, if you're sort of a believer in karma and these things, there are certain days when I just felt like, okay, we had a bad front page in the paper, the media's at us, the opposition are at us, and then I'll be out getting lunch and someone will go out of their way to stop me and say, I think you're doing a really good job and congratulations on these things. And sometimes the timing of that is just absolutely perfect. So you could never go wrong if you've got something nice to say, I think.
As you know, at Australia, one of our main goals is to let young LGBTIQ professionals to be comfortable in the workplace. Growing up, what was your experience being LGBTIQ plus in the workplace?
Well, I think it, in many regards, reflects the journey that this country has been on. So I didn't feel comfortable coming out at school or at university or in my first couple of jobs. So I was 25 when I came out, and I was uncertain at the time in the political environment then in the late 1990s what that would mean. I probably at that time, there were a lot of things going through your head when you're coming out. That experience was both incredibly positive and quite confronting, and sometimes not with the people who you thought it would be easiest with, ended up being hardest with, and vice versa. So I think in hindsight I was perhaps too pessimistic about how people would respond and thought it would be a really major issue and thought I wouldn't be able to have a political career. So I was wrong on that front. But we're just sort of discussing this today. I hope my generation, so Generation X, is the last that has to put up with quite discriminatory attitudes in the workplace, and that those that are younger will encounter both peers, managers, and sort of senior executives who are more supportive. And that's my sense generally, not in every case, but generally. But it only gets better through the work of groups like Out for Australia and through people stepping up and making a difference. And I guess workplace by workplace, community by community, that's how the world changes.
Thank you. And it does make such a difference to see other people within the workplace either out or living their authentic selves in one way or another, and I think it's really essential.
Yeah. And I suspect that the next frontier in the more confronting areas now are around gender rather than sexuality. I think that just sort of an observation now has been, not to say that all issues are resolved for gay and lesbian people, they're not, but compared to trans, intersex, and those who don't identify in a gender binary, you can see where the next lot of work needs to be done, and that's, I guess, in terms of what I'm thinking about for the future here in the ACT government and in Canberra is an area of focus.
That's a really good point. What do you think the biggest challenge, or I guess the biggest way that we can work together to try to, I guess, resolve some of those barriers, particularly for the more vulnerable communities within the queer community?
I think they're sort of largely the same issues that sort of permeated the debate around gay and lesbian people in the 80s and 90s. And it's, for some in the community, fear of the unknown, fear of difference, and not fully understanding and feeling awkward about not understanding. So at the heart of all of that seems to be education, familiarity, social engagement, all of which I guess goes to break down barriers between people. They're not majorly dissimilar issues to what we've seen in this country over 7 or 8 decades around recently arrived migrants. So at various points in Australian history, it's been pretty tough for new arrivals, and then sort of it works. Somehow our society sort of clicks into gear. It doesn't happen quick enough at times, and can be a lot of damage done along the way. But I guess the reassuring thing and the optimistic thing to say about Australia, and particularly Canberra, is that we get there, and when we do, it's a good thing. But there's a lot that we can do together to get to that happier point more quickly.
It's a great point.
Thank you for that. What advice do you have for LGBTIQ plus people entering the workforce for the first time?
Well, I think to be proud of who you are, what you would have achieved to have got to that point. So depending on sort of where you have come from, it's likely you've completed quite a lot of study or technical training to get to be at sort of at the point in your career where you're able to embark, particularly on a professional career. That's an achievement in and of itself. To think about your your short, medium, and long-term goals. What sort of a work colleague you want to be, and to support others as well. But to be true to yourself. Not everything about your working life needs to be viewed through the lens of your sexuality, but equally it doesn't mean you hide that. And for some people it will depend on the industry or area they're working in, exactly what sort of work persona they might have different from their private life, or it could be you're exactly the same whatever you do, and that I think is really about how comfortable you feel and what sort of workplace you're in. If you're in an area that's requires you to be quite extroverted and engage with a lot of people, then be that person. But there are other professional jobs and other jobs that are perhaps a little bit more either solitary or not quite as public facing, and that will obviously dictate a different sort of response. But I guess the final observation I'd make is that people entering the workforce now are likely to have multiple careers, need to retrain at different points in their work history and their work journey, and embrace that change. Don't be afraid of it, and think of all the possibilities that lie ahead in a world that I think is a little more accepting, particularly in Australia, than was the case even half a generation ago.
Definitely.
Chief Minister Andrew Barr, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. You've been watching Out for Australia with ACT Chief Minister Andrew Barr. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.